Welcome to the Cuddler Chronicles, Pain-Free Living Beyond the Body. And there are a lot of areas in life where you can just be a pain in the... With that in mind, I'd like to introduce Brandy Brown, small business attorney with Dunlap Law, where they focus on empathy, education, and empowerment. Brandy, thank you for...
That's exactly right.
Thank you for joining the show. Business attorneys, God, you do so much and so many different things, but a few questions I know that we wanted to talk about. And the first one is protecting your business with a trademark. So you shared something on LinkedIn and you put the little TM next to the painkiller. Talk to me about why you want to get a trademark, then like the difference between a trademark and copyright.
Yeah, well, trademarks are one of my favorite things to do for small business owners for a couple of reasons. First of all, nobody is mad at anybody. It's a positive experience, right? Okay. We want proactive business owners, not reactive. The worst thing is when somebody thinks they can't afford legal counsel or they don't need it, and then they only come to us when stuff has hit the fan, we'll say.
Yes.
And it's a lot more expensive, stressful, and time-consuming to fix something than it is to get it right and protect yourself in the first place. So trademarks are one of those things that's pretty proactive, right? A copyright protects an idea that's in a fixed medium, right? So if you wrote a book, if you illustrated, a portrait or something like that, if you wrote a song, those would be protected by copyright.
Okay.
A trademark protects a brand name or a logo, anything that identifies the source of goods or services that you're offering to people in commerce.
Okay.
So a lot of times people will not have the money to trademark both, right? The name and the logo of their business. But they'll say, what should I do, one or the other? My advice there is almost always to do the name because, number one, a lot of times your logo is going to include your name, right? And so you'll already be protected in those classes of goods or services you're providing under the name. No one's going to be able to register your logo with your name in it if your name is protected. However, a logo, an image mark is what they're called, they're more inherently distinctive than just words, right? So for that reason, if I feel like the business name is maybe a little bit too generic, if we're worried it might be confusingly similar to something already registered, something like that, that's when we might think more about, should you register the logo? Should you register that image mark? Because it's more distinctive just by virtue of being an image and not just, words that could be in any font, in any size, that kind of thing.
Okay.
And they're hugely protective of your business, your brand, because no one else is going to be able to use that name or that logo within the same types of goods or services you're offering. And that's an important thing to understand, is there are classes of goods or services. Part of my job is to figure out where do you actually need protection, right? Where are you actually using the logo or the brand name in commerce so that you're actually going to get approved by the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office? But not so many classes that we're needlessly driving up the cost of your application because each class you apply within costs extra money from the USPTO. And also, is there anyone already registered in those classes that's too similar? That doesn't mean has someone already registered the name, right? That's why there can be like a Dove chocolate and Dove soap, and you don't want to confuse the two, but those are not in the same class, right? They're different types of goods. So that's a big part of my job, advising on, how likely are you to be successful in your trademark application? What classes do you need protection within? Should we do the name or the logo? And once you actually get that trademark protection, it's an asset, right? It's intellectual property.
Right.
And so when you go to sell your business down the line, which is something I help with a lot, having that trademark can really drive up the price of your business because people know when they buy that name, it's protected.
Okay.
And once you've got the protection, that means you can license it out if you want to. You can let other people use your name, even your logo in some cases, and charge them a monthly fee or a recurring, any kind of licensing structure that you really want. But you can't do that unless you have that federal protection.
You said federal protection. There are state trademarks too.
Yes,
right?
That's correct.
Help me to understand that a little bit more. It's like, so you go... And you, again, in my head, trademark versus copyright is like creator versus created thing.
Yeah, that's actually a pretty good way of thinking about it.
Thank you. And if you do it at the state level, nobody in Virginia can use it, but somebody in Alabama could use my exact same logo, my exact same name, except for, RDA is, I don't know why they would use that. But
you never know with people.
You never know. So is there a huge, I don't know how to formulate what I'm asking.
Why do a state trademark versus a federal trademark?
That's
maybe?
it.
Okay. Well, and actually something you just said brought up a thought for me. Your logo, if someone were to try to use that, even if you didn't have a trademark on it, could still be protected by copyright, right? Because it's an image. It's a creation, an illustration that was made. So, and the author, right, or the creator of copyrighted work automatically owns it. And of course you can do federal registration through copyright.gov, which I recommend people do, at least try to do for the first time without an attorney, actually, because we're just kind of middlemen in that process. Okay. It's a lot of information that you will already have access to, right? Who created this? When was it first used? Things like that. So that's another way that you could get some kind of protection, right? Even if you don't have trademark protection. But to back up to trademarks, you might want to apply for state protection if you can't get federal protection because someone else is already using the name in another state, even though they don't have federal protection either. Okay. So there's something called a common law trademark, and that is where just by virtue of using, the name of the business, your logo, whatever it is that's distinctive as an identifier of the source of goods or services, you in your geographic area, which means something different to every business, right? Is it just locally in your town? Is it in your county? Are you an e-tailer? And then it's a little bit harder to determine, right? Because you might have people in all states and that kind of thing who are familiar with your brand. But just by virtue of using that brand in commerce, you can't sue someone to stop infringement, right? But you're not going to be able to be stopped from using that trademark by someone else with a common law trademark. If that other person has a federal trademark, then they can sue you for infringement in federal court. You might get one of those nasty cease and desist letters in the beginning before it even gets to the court level. That's where the real protection is. And they do cost a little bit more. But a federal trademark is going to protect you in all 50 states and our territories. So state trademark, I really only recommend. It's certainly not going to hurt you to have a state trademark, right? It's more protection than nothing. But I mostly recommend that in cases where federal trademark registration is not available.
Okay, so you've checked the database and you can't use it, so you have to. Okay, so it's a backup.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, some people want to have it just because they're only interested in the state, right? They think, I'm not really going to be transacting business anywhere else anyway. In that case, I would say let's talk about it and let's figure out if that really is a good option. Right. So it's not that it's a terrible option, and again, it's certainly better than nothing. But federal trademark protection is always better than state.
Now, I'm going to say this. This is a little bit off the beaten path, but this is exactly why I bring people on here, is because there are so many areas, like beyond the physical body, where you can have pain. And you don't know what you don't know. Like, it's the specific knowledge of different areas. That's why we have specialists. That's why we have small business attorneys versus all the other types of attorneys that they can have. There's a lot going on over there.
Oh, yeah. And not only that, but I've got other attorneys who are not business attorneys who are clients of the firm because they recognize, I might be really good at criminal law or family law, something like that. But when I start my, firm with my partner, well, we don't know anything about corporate governance. We don't know anything about what are the default rules of the Limited Liability Company Act? And, I actually need a professional limited liability company. How does that change things? Stuff like that. And I love that you said you don't know what you don't know. Yeah. That's the biggest part of the reason why my goal is to really form ongoing relationships with my clients, right? I want to be someone that they aren't afraid to call, that they want to talk to, right? So if they call and talk to me for 10 minutes a month and they just tell me what's going on in their business, what are their challenges? What are their new opportunities? Because they don't know what they don't know, that conversation is going to help me identify, okay, maybe I need to ask another question and figure out if this is going to be a legal issue, or, we had this situation with another client. Have you thought about this consideration? So a lot of it is just being able to speak to someone comfortably so that you can identify whatever's in your subject matter expertise.
What I heard was you're basically coaching small business owners.
Yeah, absolutely.
Coaching people on contracts, because there's so much that can get messed up just because of, non-specific wording and all of that stuff. Talk to me about contracts, because I know, for me, it was like, I can write my own agreements and stuff like that, and I can see your blood pressure rising.
We'll see if it's visible on camera, but yes.
So talk to me about why, like, what do you need for a contract? Why do I need you for a contract? Talk to me about that.
Yeah, well, there's 3 elements you must have to form a contract, right? You got to have an offer, you got to have acceptance of that offer, and I don't mean acceptance where you're changing the terms, that's a counteroffer. And you got to have consideration, something of value that is being exchanged, right? There's got to be some reason that's backing up, doesn't have to be a reason, but some kind of consideration that's backing up this offer and this acceptance. So that's one of the biggest places people actually get into trouble when they're trying to DIY contracts, is they don't realize this is a contract where there's no consideration involved, right? Someone is agreeing to do something for free, and that doesn't necessarily mean there's no consideration. You could be providing services in exchange for something, right? So there doesn't necessarily have to be money changing hands, but something of value has got to be given up or exchanged for something else of value, right? And that's how you can sign a liability waiver, for example, right? Because you're giving up a right that you would otherwise have to sue or something like that.
Okay.
And that is something that, it's of consideration for you to give up to get to be able to jump out of a plane. And without it, it's a condition of that company allowing you to participate in that activity. So 2 things of value being exchanged. When it comes to people writing their own contracts, a lot of times they think, okay, well, I'm going to take a bunch of different contracts and take what I like best from each one, and I'll kind of cobble it together. And I'll read it through and I'll make sure it makes sense, and then we'll sign it. And that's another area where people get into a lot of trouble. Because, first of all, if you're dealing with laws that are state-specific and you're using contracts that are not from the state you're in, you might run into issues there with inconsistencies or incompatibilities with the law. Even beyond that, inconsistencies just within the contract itself. Sometimes something will be written somewhere and it'll be, incompatible with another part of the contract, even in a small way. But small ambiguities or small contradictions, that's what creates litigation, right? Because that's when you have to fight over, all right, well, here's my interpretation, judge or panel, who do you think should win? So
that's why the contracts have to be very specific?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
And you always want to make sure, in my opinion, the whole point of the contract is to make sure everybody knows what their obligations are and what their rights are. So my firm, as much as possible, we're using plain English. We're not using legalese, right? There's some legal magic words sometimes you've got to use, right? Which is another reason people shouldn't DIY contracts, because that is not intuitive. You think okay, well, I wrote this out, it makes clear sense, so I'm just going to sign it, right? And then you might have forgotten something that will make it legally binding, and now you have a lovely piece of paper that has your signature on it. That's going to be great evidence if you have to go to court to try to show what you agreed to, but if it's not legally binding in and of itself, you're still going to have to fight over that in court. So I think when I have conversations with clients about contracts, the first thing is to understand what their goals are. Why are we signing this contract? You know what I mean? What is the value of this contract to you? Because if the value is big, if the risks are big, right, then there's no way you want to sign a contract that you haven't reviewed. There's no way you want to try to draft a contract that you're not sure is legally binding. If the implications of that are important at all to you or your business, right, there's just no reason to do that. So I think the most important thing is being clear on your goals, what you're trying to get out of the contract, being clear on what everybody agrees are the obligations and rights up front when nothing has gone wrong yet, which is people are a lot more fair before something has happened, and then they have to go back and fight over, no, we totally meant this. Yeah. And well, that's not what the contract says, so why didn't we fix that in the contract, back when we were friends about it? So you got to just be as clear as possible in the drafting, in the understanding of what's going on, and nobody should have to fight over it, right? Because you should know what you're getting into when you get into it. Right.
I always had a different thought process with contracts, and it was well, if you're willing to do it, you should be willing to say you're going to do it on paper,
yes.
Right? But you're talking about ambiguity reminds me of somebody talking about being specific with your goals and said that someday leads to a town called nowhere.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's
really.
if you know what you're trying to do with the contract, then you know how to be specific.
Yes. And knowing what you're trying to do is going to inform how the contract looks, right? A contract between 2 sophisticated businesses is probably going to you're going to see more legalese, right? It's going to look more formal, potentially, than a contract between a small business and their employees, because the goal of that contract is for the employee to understand exactly what they're signing up for, right? And your employees, they may be tradespeople, they may be attorneys themselves, right? It runs the whole gamut, but you have to consider the understanding and the sophistication of the parties to the contract too, to figure out, how should this look? How should this best serve all of the people involved? And like you said, if you're willing to be bound by something, well, first of all, you want to make sure it says what you think it does, that you are being bound by the right thing. Right. But there are occasions where people want ambiguity, where people want a little bit of wiggle room. So that's actually another thing to take into consideration. And that's why you do want an attorney is if there is somewhere you want to leave wiggle room, right? You want to make sure you are leaving only that amount of wiggle room, right? And perhaps there are some parameters around that. If there needs to be ambiguity built in because there's something that you're going to decide at a later date or something is going to be contingent upon something else, right? That's okay, but everything else should be as specific as possible. So that's the only thing we're worrying about. It's limited to, okay, what's going to happen with this one element, right, based on whatever else is happening.
Is the entire goal of a contract to avoid litigation and guide the I guess the resolution of conflict? Is that the sole purpose? Or?
No.
Okay.
I think one of the main goals, if not the main goal of a contract, should be to avoid litigation because there should be no confusion about the understanding between the parties, right? And there should be no confusion in the wording over what was agreed to. But that's really what it's for, right? Is memorializing whatever agreement was between the parties.
Right.
Now, when you've got a clearly written contract, right, that you don't have to go to court to interpret, that's when you can get into some different, alternative dispute resolution techniques, right? So maybe you agree that you're going to go, if there's a dispute over this contract, you're going to go to mediation, non-binding mediation first. You're going to just negotiate, you're going to try to work it out in front of a neutral mediator, right? Save everybody time and money and not having to go to court is always lovely because court is expensive and it's uncertain, right? We have courts of equity here in Virginia where even if the terms of a contract say something specific and you potentially should have won under that, if the judge thinks that the outcome of enforcing those terms would be inequitable, they can say, actually, we're departing for these terms, even though you agreed to it, right? So it's uncertain, right? Someone could have a bad breakfast and side against you.
Wow.
Time consuming, stressful, yeah, and again, money. So exactly. And mediation is one way, right? It's not binding. Then we also have arbitration, which in general is binding, right? That means it's almost like quasi-litigation. Okay. You're in front of a judge or a panel of judges, arbitrators, and they're going to hear you out. The rules for what kind of evidence you can present and stuff like that are going to be different than they are in litigation. And you can kind of contract to agree to what the rules are going to be. So a lot of times up front in a contract, before there's any issue, if people agree that they will be bound by mediation or arbitration, it's really usually arbitration they're bound by, but if they agree to be bound by something outside of litigation before any litigation would be filed or in lieu of litigation, right? Often for arbitration it'll say, and we agree to arbitration that's subject to the American Arbitration Association's rules, right? So you don't even have to come up with the rule. Well, AAA. You don't even have to come up with the rules. There's already a body that's got this set of rules you can choose. And that's not always the right set of rules that you want. It depends on your contract, for sure. But it's basically agreeing to, like, okay, if we got into some kind of argument over the subject matter of this contract or arising out of this contract, right, can we all agree we don't want to go to court? And so for that reason, we'll deal with it this other way. Now, if you're committing a crime, you can't agree not to go to court over that. The state or the federal government is going to tell you, no, you still have to go to court. But this is between, civil parties, right? Between not the government and, people or entities.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
So if it comes to the litigation, and in my mind, there's steps, right? So there's the mediation, then there's the arbitration, and then there's litigation, right? Is that?
I would say
right?
That's the level of formality, really.
Okay.
And there could be formal mediation, so don't get me wrong. But that's the level of, did we just agree we're going to negotiate and we'll try to come to a mutually agreed settlement using someone who's neutral, so this mediator that's going to hopefully help us. Did we agree ahead of time that we're going to do that same process, but whatever that arbiter or arbitrator says is going to be binding, right? Or are we going to just say, like, listen, we'll enforce our rights in court in front of a judge or, a jury of our peers even. So it doesn't have to escalate in that order, right? You can just say, we agree to binding arbitration. And then there's no mediation beforehand. You're not required to do that first. You
so
would
it's
go
not
straight
steps.
to.
It's
yes,
just
exactly.
different avenues to go down.
Yeah.
It's like, okay. all right, so like a fork in the road. Which way are we going to go?
Yeah. And sometimes you will build that into an agreement, though. You'll say, we're going to try mediation first. If mediation doesn't work, then we'll go to arbitration.
Okay.
And the last thing you need is the stress of litigation hanging over you. In general, it takes a really long time, right? From the time that something is filed against you to the time it's ultimately resolved, or that you're filing something against somebody, right? So I always say it's my job to keep people out of court as much as possible, right? Because I think that's the best avenue for my clients. I think my job is to be an advocate. So, if that need arises, I'm going to be an advocate.
Okay.
But as much as possible, I should be helping you be proactive, helping you prevent those situations from coming up. Or if those situations do come up, because sometimes they're unavoidable, right? Trying to figure out a way that we can resolve things. It's going to cost that business owner the least amount of stress, the least interruption to their business, and just let them get back to doing what they do best.
Wow. I said wow because that's literally the way I was going to try to put an end on it. It was like, oh, so it sounds like really your job as a small business attorney is to try to mitigate stress. And you're trying to take as much stress off and make your business journey as smooth as possible, because we all know, you own a small business and there's a lot of this, right?
Yes.
So having an advocate on your side really can take a lot of pains out, and it's stuff that you wish you had never seen if you get there, and stuff that you can't really see when you need to pay for it.
Yes. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay. So that was my thought process. So to me, there's so much potential for big pain that you mitigate before it happens. So in my world, I would say, it's really great that I can get 88% of people out of pain in 3 visits, right? It's really great. It's a whole lot better to never have that pain in the first place.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So, healing is great, but, not needing it is way better. Right?
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with contracts and finances and trademarks and copyrights and all of that.
Exactly.
So, I am glad I know you.
Thank you.
and hopefully you guys, if you need a small business attorney, Brandy, tell them how they can get in touch with you, how they can find you.
Sure. You can find me at dunlaplawplc.com. There are these short questionnaires we call a VSC. It's a vital signs checkup. It's almost like when you go to the doctor, right? And you might have to fill out some preliminary paperwork, right? Just about, okay, well, where are you hurting? Things like that, right? So for us, it's super simple questions about your business, like, do you have any employees? If you do, are any of them remote? Stuff like that. Okay. So that you'll fill that out. You'll get a consult scheduled with me for free. In that consult, I'll already have the answers to those questions, right? And so I'm going to ask you a little bit more about them. I'm also going to ask you about your goals, right? Why are you trying to find an attorney? What do you need? What are your opportunities that are coming up? What are your challenges, right? Again, identifying what legal needs you might have, even if you don't know that they're legal needs. And from there, it's just kind of almost like an in-house counsel, but we're not in-house, right? So it's when business owners need advice, when they need someone to bounce ideas off of, right? That's when I want them to be able to call me.
Right.
And so, like I said, it's dunlaplawplc.com. Fill out that questionnaire. We'll go through the free consult and figure out if people even need the services that I provide. Because sometimes they need somebody else, and I'm happy to refer them out. Sometimes the vibe is off, right? Which you always want an attorney that competence is the baseline. Like, let me just say, your attorney needs to be competent. But they also need to be somebody that you enjoy talking to, so you're not afraid to call them, right? They need to be somebody who you can trust, so you're actually going to take their advice and not just blow it off.
Right.
And so it's really important that your attorney is a good fit for you and your business. They're not just a good attorney, they're a good attorney for you.
Right. I say the same thing about doctors.
Yeah.
Like you have to want to go to them, and you have to share some pretty detailed information that's private with somebody, and you want to be able to trust them. You want to be able to connect with them.
Yeah.
So on that edge, that's why I came up with the painkiller closer.
Yeah.
Right. This first part is more about the competence, right? People that have been listening to this know you know what you're talking about, right? And they know that you probably can see areas of challenge that they may not be able to see, so you can help direct them around those, right? But now the question is, who are you, right? So with that...
Scary when you put it like that.
Yeah. Well, with that in mind, there's so many things in my profession that I don't like. I'm sure there are a lot of things in your profession you don't like.
No. I love when people say, and it often happens in consults, by the end of the consult, right? Well, I really don't like attorneys, but... And then I say, I really don't like attorneys either. And that's not true. I actually know and love a lot of attorneys.
Right.
So, but yes, you are right. There definitely
there are stereotypes for a reason.
That's why I started with I prefer proactive projects and not reactive. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So in that vein, what is the best piece of advice that you have either been given or you've seen given in your field?
The best advice is probably to prioritize communication. Ask questions, right?
Okay.
Because that's how I'm going to get to an understanding of you and your business, of the legal issues you might have, right? It should not be me talking the entire time we're on the phone. In fact, it should mostly be me listening. And I think being able to understand what is not being said, too, is also important. And then being able to deliver advice in a way that someone is receptive to. Some people like it when you put, the entire explanation for something in an email they can refer back to. Some people just want a quick phone call, like, is this okay or no, right? So it's all about being able to communicate in a way that works best for the particular person, the particular business.
I have never heard a lawyer, just personally, I've never heard a lawyer talk about it as if you're in a service profession, where it's, I always say this, if a waitress brings me Pepsi, no matter how much I like Pepsi, if I wanted sweet tea, she's not serving me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you taking as much time as you do to figure out what the client wants is amazing.
Well, and it's beneficial to me too, right? Because the longer that someone wants to have this professional relationship with me, the better I'm getting to know their business, not just what legal challenges are they facing, but what's happening on the back end, right? Who do you really need to convince to do something if you think that someone needs to be convinced of something, right? Whose communication styles do we need to be worrying about? Things like that. And so the quality of legal advice, I think, goes up the longer that someone is involved with you, because they're just going to get to know you and your particular business better and better.
A lawyer's not as good as my lawyer.
Exactly.
I like it. Okay.
Wait,
Other
have
end.
you trademarked that? 'Cause, anyway.
I have not. I should actually do it with doctor. I'm like, a doctor is not as good as my doctor. I like it. So, see, coming up with stuff right now. What is the worst piece of advice that you've heard?
The worst piece of advice, again, my job is to keep people out of court, I say, right? So the worst piece of advice I think I've heard is to try to win at all costs. We have this concept of zealous representation in the legal profession, and that is important, right? Do your best for your client. That doesn't mean be scummy. That doesn't mean, hurt others where you don't need to do that. And I sometimes see this mentality of, it's a zero-sum mentality. It's like, if I am not completely making sure everyone else loses, I can't win, right? So I think being collaborative and trying to find an outcome that is positive for everybody is the best way to move forward. Now, that doesn't mean, I'm not sacrificing my client's needs or goals to do that, right? And the client's got to be on board with whatever I do. But I think the people that I work with largely have the same mentality, where they're like, we're not trying to screw this person over. We want something that is fair. Yeah.
Okay. I like it. Win at all costs.
Yeah.
Man. Yeah. I don't know. In my head, what's going on is kind of the difference between a fireman and a carpenter. Where, like, when a fireman's done a good job, the house really doesn't look very good, right? But when a carpenter does, it looks good. So it's, not doing a great job at expense of the house.
Yeah.
Right? That's what it sounds like to me.
Yeah.
How would you describe your purpose in life?
Oh. Well, I'm just trying to make a better life for my cats.
Okay.
So no, I really do think what my purpose in life, I think it's kind of related. I think my purpose in life is to be a source of comfort and support for the people and the cats that I love, right? So I want to be someone that can be counted on to be there, someone that people are comfortable speaking with, and someone that is supporting everyone who's important to me, human or feline, in their goals and just in general in their lives. Yeah.
Okay. I like it. Similar vein, what is something that other people value that you don't? Don't say dogs.
First of all, I love dogs. If I had a yard, I'd have a dog, but sadly, I don't. So I just have 3 cats. But I would say hierarchy or top-down decision-making. So I think, and this happens in a lot of law firms, not mine. I'm really lucky about where I work and the people who I work with in that, there's absolutely mentorship. There is absolutely, that kind of, there are always people there when I need help. We're all there for each other. So we have actually a meeting every Monday morning where we go through all of our open client matters. If we have, a question about, okay, well, here's what I think I'm going to do. Anyone else have any ideas, right? It's very collaborative. It's not like, oh, I'm a partner, and so I don't have to listen to what this associate says or anything like that. And I think that's part of why we work so well for our clients, right? Is you're not just getting, well, here's what Brandy Brown thinks you should do, right? It's, sure, Brandy Brown might have had an idea, but she's also run that idea by, these other attorneys, gotten their input to maybe there's a different way we would go, or maybe it's just a confirmation of, I think that's the best thing we can do, right? And either way, having that collaboration, having it be something that everybody is participating in, I think that really adds something to our firm and to the services that we provide to our clients.
Because when they hire you, they're not just hiring you, they're hiring the whole firm, backing you up, too.
That's right.
That's pretty awesome. I did not know that.
Yes.
So this question may be more loaded for you than it is for my other guests so far. If you could create one law that everyone had to follow, what would it be?
Well, is this going to go through a notice and comment period of legislation, when you're doing legislating or...
Oh my gosh.
No, anyway.
I have no idea what you just said to
and
me.
Also, my first thought about this is I'm like, can I just get someone to comply with an existing law and use a turn signal?
Sure.
But no, I think if I could create one law that everyone had to follow, right, I think it would be that everybody has to go to therapy because... Number one, whether something is going on with you or not, everybody can use therapy. Everybody can use somebody to talk to that's not their friend or family. You don't have to worry about being judged. You don't have to worry about, appearing in a certain way, right? And because mental health services are still kind of stigmatized and still kind of hard or inaccessible to a lot of people, right? So if I could make one law, I would say everybody has to go to therapy. I wouldn't specify what type of therapy because I would leave a little ambiguity in my law on purpose so that people could, maybe find what works for them. Okay. But I think overall the world would be better if everybody had someone to talk to.
Okay. I like it.
And please use your turn signal.
Not feeling alone in life.
Yeah.
Okay. I like it. That goes with what you said your purpose was. Kind of being there for people. Now you're like creating parameters within which people can feel like they're not alone.
That's right. Yeah. And I mean, another word for an attorney is a counselor, right? So sometimes I have clients that are business owners and they call and what they're calling about is really not a legal issue. It's just something is going on and they need someone to listen to them. Maybe they need affirmation. Maybe they're looking to brainstorm and think of ideas, right? Whatever it is that they're needing in that moment, first of all, that's what I'm trying to figure out, right? But also what I'm providing to them is not just, here's the statute where it says this, right? It is counsel. It is advice. And I think it's what makes our relationships with our clients so strong too.
Okay. Tell me a book or a movie or a podcast, something in that vein that you're really passionate about and why.
Okay, I've got 2. First, there is a book called Soft Skills for the Effective Lawyer. And it's things that, at least for me, I did not learn in law school, including, for example, how to apologize. It's how to manage stress, how to talk to people, clients, and also, again, speaking of hierarchy, right? For me, I'm a lot of times working with clients who are older than me. They're certainly more experienced than I am in their industry, right? But that doesn't mean they're more experienced in the law. And so I'm having to communicate, with people who in other situations maybe would be more hesitant to listen to me or to trust my advice. So I've got to figure out, how do I show them that I'm competent? And also, how do I communicate to them my advice in a way that they're going to be receptive to? So this book has been really helpful for me. There's all these different sections on, again, how to deal with stress, even more, like there's still soft skills, but things like time management, stuff like that. And that's been really great for me. A podcast I would recommend is a podcast called You're Wrong About. And it basically is taking things from history, and some of it is recent history, but that you may have heard about in the news or had like an inkling of, but you don't know the full story. And they go into these deeper dives on it. And I will say the earlier seasons were better because there was a co-host I really liked. But I will suggest a specific episode, which is about Kitty Genovese. She's a woman who was murdered in New York. And there was all this stuff about, bystanders heard her screaming and no one helped. It's where we get the bystander laws from, where if you help somebody, anyway, I don't need to get into this. All that to say, the reason I would recommend that is it's a podcast that has really helped me learn to be more empathetic. Because a lot of this is, it'll be a topic that I did think I knew something about. A good example is the McDonald's hot coffee case, and then you hear what really went on and you just realize like, oh, well,
that wasn't as frivolous as we
not
thought.
at all. Yes.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things like that where, the more you think about it, the more you dedicate thought to something and the more you open your mind to what someone else could be going through, because you never know, right? I think the easier it is to connect with people, but also for me, it's made me a better person. So I would recommend that specific episode to start with. And I think there is also a hot coffee episode, I'm pretty sure. So that's a good one too.
That brings up one that's not in here, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
There is a YouTube channel where a lawyer goes through things like that, and it's called whatever it is gets lawyered.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
You've seen that
Yeah.
guy? Are you a fan?
Yeah, I'm a fan.
Yeah, you're a fan. Yeah, I've enjoyed a few episodes.
It's
of
a
that.
fun watch and listen. Yeah.
And I guess the other one is, this is going to be bonus just for you. Favorite show about lawyers, least favorite show about lawyers.
Okay. Favorite show about lawyers is The Good Wife. And the reason is, although I'm not going to say it, not after something happens in season 2. Anyway, all that to say. I like it because the legal parts are more realistic than most other law-related shows that I've seen.
Okay.
Specifically, I actually learned about the show because my federal evidence professor would show us certain clips where they would actually be introducing evidence in the right way or objecting in the right way, right? And so I started watching those clips, and then I was like, dang, I gotta watch this show. Got sucked into it. Again, first 2 seasons, great. Don't recommend after that. Least favorite show is probably Suits.
Really?
I do think it's entertaining. But it's not for me. It's not made for me. We'll say that.
Okay. It's a soap opera.
Yes, which I can get into. Don't get me wrong. I watched every season of Desperate Housewives, and that only got increasingly insane. But not Suits. Not Suits.
Okay. All right. So we're almost done, right? And my last question is always, when you are done in this life, or even just done in your career, what would you want to have accomplished, or how do you want to be remembered? You can choose.
I want to be remembered as somebody who made things easier. So whether that is, for my business owner clients, demystifying legal issues, right? For the people I know and love, making people laugh or brightening people's day, right? I would just like to be remembered as somebody who tried to do her best to make other people's lives better in whatever way I'm able to do that.
Brandy Brown, Dunlap Law. Tell them again how they can find you.
Yeah, you can find me at dunlaplawplc.com. You can find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, search YouTube for Dunlap Law. Our managing partner, Trisha Dunlap, does all these wonderful videos that are informative and entertaining. Anywhere on the internet, Google's free for everybody, Dunlap Law.
That's great. Google's free for everybody. So I'm very thankful because I feel like I know a lot more about what you do, especially those pieces of it and the heart with which you do it. So I really appreciate you coming on. Again, the Cuddler Chronicles, pain-free living beyond the body.
Thank you for having me.